Hugs and diplomacy once again underlined Prime Minister Narendra Modi's first foreign trip after assuming office for a third term. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni welcomed PM Modi with a namaste at the 50th G7 summit, which is being held in Apulia, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Prime Minister addressed the outreach session. Apart from this, PM Modi met with the French President Emmanuel Macron, UK's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The Modi-Macron meet was the fourth such meeting between the two leaders, with a focus on matters pertaining to defense, security, technology and artificial intelligence. PM Modi also met with UK's Indian origin Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, and of course the bonhomie between the two leaders was once again for everybody to see as the duo shared a hug. The PM assured strengthening of the India-UK comprehensive strategic partnership. Talks also focused on further cementing ties between the two nations, especially in the defense sector. After this, the Prime Minister met Volodymyr Zelensky and there was another warm hug. The meeting comes, remember, at a time when Zelensky has pushed India to join the upcoming peace summit in Switzerland to halt the Russian offensive. PM Modi once again reiterated that the way to peace is through dialogue and diplomacy. Now, another rather interesting visual that came in from the G7 summit today was the Pope's presence there. Pope Francis and Prime Minister Modi had a warm meeting. Remember, the Pope is leading the talks on artificial intelligence at the summit. Let's understand the key takeaways and India's crucial role at the global table as it participates at an outreach, as an outreach country in the G7 summit, the 50th edition of the G7 summit. On the broadcast, I'm joined by Ms. Veena Sikri, former ambassador. In a short while, we'll also be joined by Dr. Swasti Rao, associate fellow at the MP IDSA. Ambassador Sikri, good evening. Namaskar. Thank you very much for speaking with us on Mirror Now. This is a crucial G7 summit. Prime Minister Modi has addressed the G7 summit as an outreach nation. But since the visuals have been coming in since morning, what do you make of it really? For you, what have been, the big highlights so far?
I think it's a very important summit. First of all, for Prime Minister Modi, so soon after taking over his third term as Prime Minister of India, quite unprecedented in the annals of Indian history. Yes. We've only had Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru before that taking a third term like this. So that was a very important occasion that just days after the oath-taking ceremony, Prime Minister Modi had been invited to participate in the G7 summit, in the outreach sessions, and in the special session on artificial intelligence and on the Africa-Mediterranean connection. So this is a very valuable moment for our Prime Minister to meet the leaders of the G7, who are all anxious to meet him. They're congratulating him. They all have congratulated him on his oath-taking ceremony for the third time, and they are eager to hear from him on his plans for the next 5 years for India, because they attach a lot of importance to what India has been doing. We have seen already that that President Macron, French President Macron, in his speech, praised Prime Minister Modi for the achievements, for the concentration, for the focus on artificial intelligence, on digital public infrastructure, the payment system, and on energy. So I think that the welcome that our Prime Minister has received has been quite unprecedented. It's a valuable moment for our Prime Minister, but to see the warm welcome, the great welcome he has received is really unprecedented, and it warms our heart to see our Prime Minister being welcomed in this very, very warm and friendly manner. We've seen the very warm embrace he had with the Pope, with Pope Francis, and our Prime Minister has invited Pope Francis to come to India. There are two other factors that I must say that make this moment, the G7 moment, a very important one indeed. On the one hand, we have President Putin, Vladimir Putin, in St. Petersburg in Russia, making a very important statement offering a peace process. And on the other hand, we have at the G7 in Italy, President Zelensky from Ukraine, who is there and who has already tried to hedge and make some conditionalities about the offer that President Putin has made. Now, certainly this is a very important moment because, as our Prime Minister has conveyed to President Zelensky, they've already had a meeting, they've already exchanged a warm embrace, and our President has conveyed that dialogue and diplomacy is the only answer, and this is certainly not the moment for war in the world. So I think that here
but
again...
Ambassador Sikri, can I also ask you at this moment, since you mentioned Ukraine-Russia conflict, the Prime Minister, of course, had a warm meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky. But interestingly, the Prime Minister is not going to be present at the Peace Summit, which is being held at Switzerland. Now we know that the Secretary West of the MEA, Mr. Pavan Kumar, will be attending that summit. Clearly sending out a message that, yes, we do attach importance to it, but the Prime Minister himself not attending the summit also sends out a signal?
Yes, I think we made our position on this very clear even before the elections. And it was clear even then that Prime Minister would not like to attend this summit. And I think that a peacekeeping summit of this nature, if you wanted to make an impact, then all sides have to be at the table. This is what India has been saying all along, but as we know, Russia had not been invited to this particular summit in Switzerland. So I think India is fully within its rights to say that we certainly are very interested in any potential peace process. And we would be there, as you said, Secretary West is going to be there. But at the level of Prime Minister, no, not at this time. And I think now that President Vladimir Putin has given his peace offer, this will certainly be a big issue for discussion. But to carry it forward, to have any, you cannot have remote responses. You know, the proposal for peace has been made far away in St. Petersburg. We've had at the G7 in Italy a response, the first response from President Zelensky, and now there will be this meeting in Switzerland. So let's see if at any moment you can get all the parties together there. And I wanted to point out another second important development that has happened in the world in the last few days, which is certainly going to have a very big impact on economic aspects of the G7 and other summits of its kind, which is the decision by Saudi Arabia to terminate the petrodollars agreement. And that from now on, Saudi Arabia will no longer feel bound to quote prices of oil in petrodollars or to purchase oil or to sell oil in dollars. So this is going to have certainly a very vast impact on the world economy. And I think that this is something that the G7 is going to discuss. But the third and very important reason for our Prime Minister Modi's being there is that it has given him a golden opportunity to present the results of the G20. And this is a very important opportunity for our Prime Minister to present the very successful results of the G20 summit in India that was held in September, and so many initiatives that were taken during the entire year, which culminated in the very important consensus document that was adopted at the G20 summit, despite everybody feeling till the very last minute that there may not be a consensus document. But we all know that there was a great success, not only the entire year of meetings, but the summit itself, which came out with this consensus document. So this is a golden opportunity for our Prime Minister to present the results of the consensus document and to see how the G20 can carry this forward. How the G7 and the G20 with India as the immediate past president and Brazil as the present president, who's also there at the G7 summit, they can all work together on carrying it forward. It's a very valuable moment.
Yeah. Master Sikri, one of the visuals that everybody was waiting for today was that meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. That happened, of course, it's all dominating social media, it's viral online. But aside from all the memes and the light humor that's been going on, the India-Italy relationship I want to particularly talk about because it's not always been smooth sailing for the two countries. We've had a rough patch with them, especially when we had that Marines case with Italy. But now, since the past few years, this relationship has sort of ironed out and weeded out its troubles, its strained ties, and now it's moving towards greener pastures, towards a healthier relationship. How do you see that really panning out, considering the fact that the two countries share a strategic partnership?
Yes, it is, in fact, a very important strategic partnership for India. But you're quite right that in the last few years, it had been a very tough relationship. We did see how China was almost overwhelming Italy. And this invited a huge reaction during and after COVID. During and immediately after the COVID pandemic, we saw a huge reaction to this because it is well known that it's the Chinese workers who returned from China in the spring of January of 2020. 2020 and carried the pandemic back with them to Italy and to the rest of Europe. So it has infuriated a lot of people in Italy and in the European Union that China could be so irresponsible and so uncaring, knowingly sending their workers who had been infected with the COVID pandemic. Nobody knew how many had and how many did not have it, and they sent them back to that. Now, ever since Prime Minister Meloni has taken over in Italy, she has really reoriented and redefined, re-energized the relationship with India, and she's tremendously popular. You've seen how she's even adopted the Namaste when she's not only greeting our Prime Minister, but other dignitaries of the world as well. So she's really been impacted by her 2 visits to India and by the very strong rapport that she had with Prime Minister Modi. So she is now playing a very crucial role in the EU. We've seen that how in the recent European Parliament elections, there's been a swing to the far right, which has really set a lot of disturbances, very, very important concerns have been generated by this all over the EU. President Macron has ordered fresh elections, and we've seen many other countries were so concerned by this. But certainly the Prime Minister of Italy is not, because she's absolutely on that side herself. So she is a very important interlocutor at this time, and she's had a good meeting with our Prime Minister, very important exchange of views. I think it's going to be a very important anchor for carrying the India-EU relationship forward, as well as the bilateral relationship as well.
Sure. Sure. With that, also let me welcome Dr. Swasti Rao with a namaste. Dr. Rao, since we're talking about the namaste that Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni welcomed our Prime Minister with. But, talking about India's crucial role at the G7 summit and at the global table, Dr. Swasti, one of the reasons is also to counter China's expansionist policy. And the G7 has been putting up a united front against the Chinese economic and military actions. How do you see India playing that role moving forward?
Well, agree. A very good evening to you, Shreya. As far as containing China is concerned, yes, first of all, the way India likes to project it semantically, we always say that we are not there to contain anybody. We are there to sort of, protect our own interests, etc., etc. So that's the official, stand we take. This is much more, okay, so there are 2 ways in which I think I see the cooperation panning out with the Europeans, okay, particularly. You already mentioned, I was listening to Ambassador Sikri when she was telling about, how things have panned out in Italy, etc. So, well, one of the things that is happening is that the Europeans are very mindful of diversifying away from China. So, when they're diversifying away from China, the one area that then stems out for India then is, of course, the area of investments. And we have been also worried about why the China +1 investments are not really reaching India, are going elsewhere in Vietnam and Bangladesh and so on. Now, one of the reasons why they have not been finding their way to India is concerning. I think the Prime Minister and the government is also back, and they have a very clear agenda in terms of how to sort of iron out those economic differences. For example, how can you better improve the ecosystem so that you become a more investment-friendly country? We don't give freebies like Vietnam does, so obviously that's another thing. But that's one of the parts. Okay, the other thing is also about ramping up manufacturing in India. And of course, you know that the government has also come out with different kinds of PLI, incentives schemes to actually ramp up manufacturing and how to sort of make in India the centerpiece of how we want to take our manufacturing and our embeddedness in the global supply chains in the future. That's one part of it. The other part is the security domain. I want to talk about it a little bit as well, because when it comes to the security domain, I think one of the regions where our understanding of security and our understanding of how to enhance security really sort of converges well with the Europeans as the maritime domain. And, that is also one area where I need to underscore that we and the Europeans have much in common, because unlike what the US and UK stand for, which is a more offensive or more, I would say a more offensive posture in the maritime domains, India and the other European players like the EU itself and France, etc., they share a more multipolar view, of security in the seas. And as a result, they want to strengthen defensive posturing. And for that, if you see that India has been on board, of course, there have been the bilateral, joint exercises, of course, those are there. But when it comes to upholding a more defensive posture at sea, I genuinely see that there's more convergence between India and European actors. And one of that is going to be around sharing maritime domain awareness. And in fact, one of the things now that the EU is working on is something called the critical maritime route security. And they are going to be coming out with an updated version of that, the Cremario 3. And actually, India and Cremario 3 of the EU have can have a lot of common by way of sharing more information, can by way of sharing more enabling mechanisms to share the MTA. Okay, and that is also one of the reasons why you see that India has been more easily on board on EU-related missions such as the EU NAVFOR mission, the EU Naval Force mission, such as Operation Atalanta or the Operation Aspides more recently. And then there's also the coordinated maritime presence, another kind of an EU tool which talks about bolstering, defensive posture in the seas. So talking, and then there are also other host of
so
options
clearly,
that emerge.
maritime holds a lot of importance.
Yeah.
And of course, the stability and the peace of the Indo-Pacific region. Ambassador Sikri, if we talk about the challenges that, the G7 as well as, taking India into account as well, might face ahead, what would they be in which sectors?
Well, I think the economic one is certainly a very, very important challenge. I think the condition of the economy now, I just mentioned about the petrodollar deal having now finally being a thing of the past. We do not know what impact it's likely to have. So this economic challenge is very major. And for the G7, whenever they meet and discuss, this is very, very important. So I think that this is something they're going to look at very carefully. The maritime challenge, I think, is very important. And the EU itself is looking at a new policy in the Indo-Pacific. They're now looking at having a strong policy, and they do see India as a key partner in their formulation and execution of the policy toward the Indo-Pacific. So I think that the discussion on the Indo-Pacific on maritime security is going to be very important. I think the environmental issues, the EU always attaches to the highest importance, and we in India have kept our promises. We are a unique country to have kept our promises made at the COP meetings, and this is unique for us. We've also taken a great initiative on the International Solar Alliance and other such issues, and we can certainly talk a lot about this in the EU context. And finally, I think on the two issues that our Prime Minister is addressing the outreach summit is on artificial intelligence and the energy infrastructure, and we're going to talk about our advances in digital payment structures, the DPI. So I think that these are issues where India has a lot to give, has a lot to talk about, is willing to share its technology, and is also wanting to hear from the EU countries on the economic aspect, on how they plan to tackle the economic crises that are ahead of us. With the EU as a whole, India is looking to, revitalize its relationship, finalize an FTA with them, talk about the Trade and Technology Council that we'd like to have with them. So there are a lot of items to be discussed and on the agenda, as it were. But I would put the economy ahead of all of them. And from our side, we're going to talk about counterterrorism. This is going to be very important from our side. We always try to seek a consensus on counterterrorist issues.
Yeah, we'll have to see, the details, of course, are still trickling in. And one of the most interesting visuals, of course, was Pope Francis there meeting Prime Minister Modi once again. And Pope Francis leading the talks on artificial intelligence. That's going to be interesting to see, as well as the fact what PM says on AI. I'll leave it there. Dr. Swasti Rao and Ambassador Veena Sikri, thank you very much to both you ladies for joining us on Mirror Now and sharing your perspectives on the G7 summit, of course, and the Indian role in it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.